Welcome back, everybody. It is time for another edition of Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey Sports original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders. Your hosts for this journey over the next several minutes will be myself, Scott Gulbransen. Thanks for being with us. And my partner in crime here, Mr. Moe Moton. He's a senior NFL writer at Bleacher Report, a Raiders columnist at sportsnot.com, where you can also find him on x.com if you want to engage. At Moe Moton, M-O-E-M-O-T-O-N. You can also send me a note, send me a message, tell me what you think of what we're doing here on the show, or what you think of the Raiders at LV Gully. You can also catch my work up on sportsnot.com, where I write about the Raiders and other things. So we appreciate you guys being with us. Well, the 2024 NFL Draft is in the books. The Raiders have selected their players. They've signed undrafted free agents. We're going to get into all of that and find out how people are feeling about this, because I think the Raiders did pretty well. Some observations we'll get into here as we roll through this show. Mo, draft did not disappoint. It was crazy first round. And then for those of us who are geeky enough to really dive deep on the draft, rounds 2 through 7, you were looking for gems and seeing if the Raiders could address their problems. But overall, the NFL draft this year was really deep because of COVID. Remember, a lot of these kids would have been out in successive years before, but because of COVID, a lot of players, 5-6 years, they spent in college. And so this draft, Mo, was unusual in that way, in that you're not going to see, I think, depth at so many positions in subsequent drafts next year, 2025, 2026, because of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's why with some of the quarterback ages they mentioned, they was like, well, this quarterback's going to be 24. This quarterback's going to be 25 in a year. It didn't really bother me too much because, COVID year, extra year of college, I get it. But the draft for me, and I did a Bleacher Report live on Sunday, just grading each individual pick and the overall class. Like you just said at the beginning of the stream, I think a lot of Raider fans feel good about this class. Now, there are some people who still feel like, man, we should have got a quarterback. Raiders should have got a quarterback. That's the one complaint. I think that's the one complaint that most Raider fans have if they were to critique this class. Now, there are some project players that we'll talk about today, but I think overall, a lot of Raider fans give it between a B and an A. From what I saw in my Bleacher Report lives, I saw a lot of A's, I saw a lot of B pluses. I gave it a B plus, and I'll explain why during the show. But again, I think it was the quarterback position that people are still apprehensive about. Again, with 6 quarterbacks coming off the board in the first 12 picks, the Raiders really didn't have a choice. The reports are that they tried to move up and were unsuccessful in doing it. We've said this before, Scott. You can't trade up with yourself. You got to have a willing partner.
Right, and that's where even in a piece I wrote kind of evaluating the Raiders draft class, or at least kind of recapping, I shouldn't say evaluating, recapping it, that's the one thing I said. I said, listen, they didn't address the quarterback position. That does not mean they didn't have a good draft class, because to your point, what we've heard in subsequent reports too, Vincent Bonsignore, Vinny, our good buddy over at the Las Vegas Review-Journal, mentioned in his Monday piece about how, hey, the Raiders really tried to get up to 2 and 3. They really tried hard to get there. And guess what? As you said, Mo, those teams would not move. So you can't fault the Raiders. You can't criticize them to say, hey, well, you needed a quarterback. And I saw some people, and I don't disagree with their premise, that the Raiders still have a question mark at quarterback as far as long-term planning goes. Absolutely correct. But the fact remains they couldn't. They tried. Who knows what kind of capital? Maybe we'll find out a little more about it as time goes on. But they tried to do it. So they wanted to get Jaden Daniels or one of the other quarterbacks. I'm assuming Jaden Daniels was one of them, obviously, because that's who they were closely linked to. And then even if they like Michael Penix, boom, the Falcons throw the whole draft, the whole first round into a little bit of an uproar because no one expected the Falcons to take a quarterback. We started hearing grumblings of that, and shout out to the usual Rappaport, Schefters, all those guys right before the draft said, hey, they might take a quarterback there. And sure enough, they did. So yes, and we'll get into the quarterback question a little bit later. But Mo, I think the most thing I was impressed with, and we'll get into the specific players in a few minutes here, but the thing I was mostly impressed with was the way in which Tom Telesco and this Raiders team went methodically. You could see a clear plan there. Now, yes, when they took Brock Bowers, and people loved, by the way, our response to it live on the air when we were live on the air. People were like, oh, Scott, your face was just hysterical. Yes, we were shocked. It wasn't a bad shock. Some people are like, "Oh, why are you shocked? He's a great player." No, it wasn't that. It was we just were not expecting it. Nor was most of the NFL, by the way. So the Raiders do that. But to me, the one point I want to make before we move into the players, Mo, is that I've been impressed with the Raiders, how they've been so focused and professional in the offseason, including the draft. So they went out, and now you see why Gardner Minshew was brought in. I'm not saying Gardner Minshew is the answer. Some people think he's the next Ken Stabler, all this kind of crazy stuff. I'm not going there. But what I'm saying is that they knew, sitting at 13, that even if they did the best that they could to move up in the draft, they might not get a quarterback. So what do? They go get a guy who can be a good spot starter, who can get you to the at least the precipice of the playoffs, maybe not, maybe into the playoffs, like we saw with the Colts last year. So he does that. And then they go through this draft. They don't overpay for a quarterback. That's another good sign, as much as it hurt people because they wanted a quarterback. He takes the best player available, which Raiders have not always been known to do, by the way. And then he addressed needs. So talk to me too, because you did the piece, and I've pimped it here a lot about the history of Tom Telesco's drafts. It stayed pretty consistent with what he did, a la the Brock Bowers pick was a little different. But other than that, you got to like that they really stayed towards their plan. And Mo, more than that, and I got some questions about some of these guys. I do, and we'll get into it. But more than that, they stayed with the type of player that Tom Telesco and Antonio Pierce said that they wanted going back a couple weeks ago.
Right. I think this is a very, I don't want to say just an Antonio Pierce draft class, because one of the points that I made on Bleacher Report Live Sunday was, if you notice, there's a certain type of player they were after. The physical, tough guy who's gonna bring it on every snap. And that's what you got in immediately your first two picks. You see it with Brock Bowers. Again, the misinformation about Brock Bowers is that he can't block. Again, blocked well on the college level. You have to find out if he can do it on the pro level at his size. Jackson Powers, JPJ. Jackson Powers, JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson. Also, another physical tough guy who's going to be on the interior of the offensive line. You think about Tommy Eichenberg in the 5th round, 2-down thumper, who I think has a little more upside with Antonio Pierce coaching linebackers. Because remember, I know the knock against Tommy Eichenberg is not great in coverage. It was the same knock against Robert Spillane when he was signed last offseason by us, and me included, that, okay, Robert Spillane, 2-down thumper, tough guy, goes downhill, fine, but liability in coverage. And that's some of the similarities you're hearing about, Tommy Eichenberg. And I think with Antonio Pierce coaching the linebackers, you got to give Tommy Eichenberg a little more of a higher ceiling, and that he could be the replacement eventually for Robert Spillane, who's got 1 year left on his contract. So when you look at the draft class in totality, you're right. They stuck to a certain type of player. They have a mentality that they want to instill in that locker room on offense and defense, specifically in the trenches. And they have that with this draft class.
Yeah, and we're gonna. I want to touch in the third segment. We're gonna focus on the quarterback situation, and how it worked out in the draft and what it means for the Raiders moving forward. We'll do that last because I think it deserves a little bit of its own time. But I spent time around Eichenberg at the combine. We were in a media gaggle that kind of thinned out, and there's only like 4 or 5 of us left. And obviously, since I live in Ohio now, and I got all my good buddies here, including a shout out to my good friend Irv Mitchell, who's an Ohio State maniac. It's almost like a religion. I want to just sometimes put duct tape over his mouth. I spent time with him, and we were sitting there talking, and somebody asked him the question, well, what's your favorite part of football? And he just kind of he kind of looked at him strangely, and he said, I just love to hit people. And so when you look at Tommy Eichenberg, some of the criticism against him too is that he's not athletic, right? He's not really an athletic guy. It doesn't matter. He's the kind of guy that, to your point, that Antonio Pierce, Tom Telesco, it's how they want to build this roster. And you're right. Some of these guys, to get Tommy Eichenberg in the 5th round, I thought he'd go earlier. Clearly, some of those intangibles hurt him, and he moved in the 5th round, which benefited the Raiders. But again, I think going back, the one thing that I'll say, and I've seen a lot of folks that listen to the show that I see in social media over the weekend, that they feel really good about the draft. They don't maybe necessarily feel good about every player, but they feel like, hey, I feel like there's a grown up in the room at GM, and that's not a criticism against everybody else who's been GM at the Raiders, but it did, outside of the Bowers surprise, it did not seem like the quote unquote standard Raider draft where you're like, what the hell are they doing?
Right, and I said this on Bleacher Report Live. I also wrote this, and I said this on CNN actually too, that they have a direction now. Whereas some draft classes in the past, you're like, I don't know what the plan is, long term, short term, what they're doing at this position or that position. You can clearly see they have a direction. I talked about the physicality that they're going to play with, continuing from last year that Antonio Pierce established as the interim head coach. But you also see it with certain positions where they're going. They double dip their cornerback. So clearly they wanted to address that need. They didn't address it early. I said it how many times on this show, Scott? Tom Telesco does not draft cornerbacks in the first round. He waited all the way until the fourth round to address the cornerback position. And I've said this too, that when you have a strong defensive line, when you have a strong defensive front, cornerback becomes less dire of a need because your defensive line does a lot of the work up front and helps that secondary out. And obviously they agree with me in that they didn't have to grab a cornerback early. They waited to the fourth round to Cameron Richardson, and then MJ Devonshire in the seventh round, who I really like, I'll get into, but they doubled at that cornerback. They obviously agree with my point about the linebacker position. The Raiders only have one linebacker under contract after the 2024 season, so they got Eichenberg, and I think he's going to be the long-term guy there, could possibly be. And then, as I said, day two was not exciting, but it was necessary getting two offensive linemen.
No doubt about it. And I think that's the key with some of these Raiders picks, because and I'm with you, I give them a solid B to B plus, depending how you look at it, especially with getting Brock Bowers in the first round. I know it seems strange and I was shocked, but dude is a player. I mean, and we'll get into the players in the next segment as we roll along here on Silver and Black today. But I think overall you're right. And what I liked about this draft was I felt like under Gruden Mayock, under even Dave Ziegler, the one time I saw them drafting for immediate needs, which you need to do. But some of the long-term stuff just didn't make sense to me that they did. This one makes more sense. And I think even these late round gems that I think they found, I think that bodes well for Raider Nation moving forward. So it's a very good sign. Again, I'm not saying you got to like every pick or you don't ask the question, why didn't we take this guy and instead we took this guy? I get that from a fan perspective, and I'm not disagreeing with them because they have valid points. But I do like that they stayed true to themselves, and they kind of did what they told us they were going to do. So it's all good. All right, we're going to take our first break. When we come back, we're going to get into the Raiders draft picks here on the Tuesday edition of Silver and Black today, and we'll get into the players and talk about it. I think there's a couple guys that were drafted too early by the Raiders, but they like them, and so, hey, we'll see how they work out. We're going to get into that. You're with Mo and Scott. This is Silver and Black today, an Odyssey Sports original podcast. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. It is time for segment 2 of Silver and Black today here on this Tuesday. Thanks for being with us. We are talking about the NFL draft. Do us a favor. If you don't already subscribe to the podcast, do so wherever you get your audio. Mo and I appreciate that. Those downloads mean everything to us. So if you're watching us on YouTube and you just watch us there, that's awesome. I'm not telling you to have to listen to it, but go download it, start playing it for us. It's awesome. You can do that. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget, subscribe, hit that thumbs up, and the notifications bell so you know whenever we have a new video. Scott Gulbransen and Moe Moton with you. Mo, senior NFL writer at Bleacher Report, Raiders columnist at sportsnot.com. Also, by the way, a great spot Mo did on CNN. So you can find him on Fridays, CNN, True TV, Turner. They move him around because they own all those networks. So, hey, you're going to find Mo in a tie on Friday because he was on the mothership. He was on the mothership, and I was like, I put it on. I'm like, Mo's in a tie. I love it. You had a good time, man.
I had to switch it up. I had on, draft was in Detroit, so I had my Detroit Lions colors on, black shirt, blue tie. So I had to, I cleaned it up a little bit. When you move up a level and you're on the mainstream network, you gotta spiff it up a bit, and I did that.
That's right. And you did an amazing job. So it's all good. And obviously Mo will have some great stuff coming up on Bleacher Report and then also on Sportsnot around the Raiders draft. I'm sure he's already thinking about what he's going to write about this week, as will I. So you can check out work of his up on both spots. And you can also check out my written work up on Sportsnot as well. All right. So Mo, let's dive into this. I'm going to flash up now for those of you watching the Raiders class for 2024. We start out Brock Bowers, of course, tight end in the first round. Then Jackson Powers-Johnson, the guard/center. He's going to play guard for the Raiders. DJ Glaze, the Cameron Richardson, the cornerback out of Mississippi State. And, of course, Tommy Eichenberg. We spent some time talking about him in the first. Dylan Lobb, a really interesting running back out of the University of New Hampshire. Trey Taylor, by the way, one of the guys that I love that they took from Air Force, and he can play. He doesn't have to go serve his time. He can actually be eligible to play in the NFL this year. And then in round 7, actually, it's not round 8. Hello, typo by me. Round 7, the second pick was MJ Devonshire, the cornerback out of Pittsburgh. So you look at this, Mo. You look at this class and what the Raiders were able to do here. And first of all, I mean, we talk about Brock Bowers. We'll just start there because I think Brock Bowers, and you made this point and you helped me actually in my writing because when we talked about this on our live draft show, it triggered for me something about when I wrote about him, which is Brock Bowers is an incredible weapon to have on offense, okay? And so to have him on offense is huge for this Raiders team. But at the same time, what you have to realize is that if you're going to do that, you have to use him appropriately. So talk about Brock Bowers because people are like, well, you have Michael Mayer. Now, Michael Mayer still, I think, has massive upside still. I think he's going to get much better. And people are saying, well, you have Michael Mayer. You got to develop him. What's the difference between, for folks out there, Mo, explain the difference because there's a big difference, I think, between the two players because they play the same position, but they don't play it the same way.
There are different types of tight ends. Without getting too nerdy into it, you got your inline strictly blocking tight ends. You got your hybrid tight ends who can block fairly well and catch the ball fairly well, and then you have your tight ends who are basically receivers.
Yeah.
And that's what Travis Kelce. Now, Travis Kelce has worked on his blocking over time, but he's most known for his receiving, his pass catching skills. Um, I remember, I'm not sure who it was, but I think it was my guy over at Raiders Waivers podcast. He said Brock Bowers reminds him or gives him Dallas Clark vibes. So if you remember Dallas Clark of the Indianapolis Colts, very good pass catcher, also a decent blocker, in my opinion. Not the greatest blocker, but more known for his pass catching. I would say Brock Bowers is a more athletic version of Dallas Clark because Brock Bowers opted out of testing this offseason, but if you watched him at Georgia, very athletic tight end. Give him that, and he can rack up yards, a lot of yards after the catch because of his play strength. But with Brock Bowers, it's going to be, to me, between Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. Michael Mayer is going to be your more traditional tight end. He's going to be able to pass catch and block. Now, he sharpened up his blocking last season. That was a knock against him coming into the NFL. Brock Bowers, to me, when he first comes in as a rookie, he's going to be asked to catch the football. Yeah. And I think that's going to be important for the Raiders offense because now you have the mismatches on the field with two tight ends who can catch the football. That's unusual. You don't see a lot of two tight end sets where both tight ends are very good at catching the football. Usually it's a blocking tight end matched or complementing a pass catching tight end. In this case, the Raiders have two pass catching tight ends who can create mismatch in the middle of the field. And also remember, when Luke Getsy was in Chicago, Cole Kmet is just coming off one of his best years, had a career high in catches and receiving yards. So Luke Getsy, to his credit, while we have questions about him, knows how to use a tight end in his offense.
Right, and to me, that's the key here is making sure that Getsy uses him appropriately. And I went back and I watched some of that Bears footage. I also went back and watched some of the old. I know people will be squeamish when I say this. Excuse me, but I watched some of the old Patriots video where you take Rob Gronkowski, for example, and this is exactly how I think they need to use Brock Bowers if they're going to get everything out of him. Which is you'll see a two tight end set, but you'll see, in this case, it would be Brock Bowers go in motion and then line up in the slot, right? He lines up in the slot as a receiver. So I think when you think about Brock Bowers, yes, he might be in the typical formation with a tight end where they're jumbled up and they're getting ready for it looks like a run or whatever, and then they leak out. But a lot of the times you'll see him not only go in the slot, but every once in a while, like they did with Gronkowski, he'll go to the outside, Mo, and line up outside as a wide receiver too.
Right, and that's the thing that I wanted to also highlight. If you're thinking of Brock Bowers as strictly a tight end, it's probably the wrong way to think about it. If you're thinking that, oh, he's just a tight end, then you're going to say it was a bad pick. They drafted a tight end. They didn't need a tight end. Think of Brock Bowers more as an offensive mismatch weapon, playmaker. When you think of him that way, can line up in line, can line up in the slot, then in the backfield as well, then you're thinking, okay, the Raiders can open up their offense with this playmaker. The only downside to this, I would say, is because Brock Bowers lined up a lot in the slot at Georgia, is we may not get to see the full potential of Trey Tucker. So when Brock Bowers is lining up in the slot, because Trey Tucker is mostly a slot guy, wide receiver, he'll probably be off the field. and you're wondering, okay, new regime comes in, they're not attached to Trey Tucker. Tom Telesco isn't. I'm wondering, do they still have a plan for Trey Tucker? Is he still in their plans? Because he should be, because he's still the burner on that offense. I would
Yeah.
like to see him continue to develop.
Yeah, and that's where I think the selection of Brock Bowers increases. Now, I'm not listen, you're a coach in the NFL, folks. It's high pressure. You
Yeah.
got to win, right? Everybody knows that. But I think the pressure now on Luke Getzey is even higher because he has the weapons there, right? They did that. Now they built the offensive line, and we'll talk about that in a second. But now with Brock Bowers there, Mr. Moton, there's no excuses, man. You got all kinds of things at your disposal, all kinds of schemes and plays that you can develop and use that you couldn't if it was last year, for example, with the Raiders. Now, the quarterback thing is different, but when you look at that, you now have the opportunity. You got a quick, as you mentioned, Tucker. You got a quick slot receiver that you can use. You have Jacoby Myers is a good receiver. You have Devontae Adams. Enough said, and Michael Mayer. Like, dude, what do you want? Okay, running back. We'll talk about that. But seriously, Luke Getzey now. The pressure is on him to use him appropriately because if you come out in the first 4 or 5 weeks and Brock Bowers has 4 catches or something like that, it's not going to look good for him.
Right. And the other thing that you pointed out that I want to expand on is if you look at the Raiders' pass catchers, just look at their pass catchers. There's so much versatility there. Devontae Adams can play all 3 wide receiver positions. He can be your Z, he can be your X, he can line up in the slot. Trey Tucker, I said, exclusively in the slot receiver, but he has the speed over the top. Jacoby Myers, as we know, can line up on the outside, can line up on the inside. We're talking about Brock Bowers today, can line up in the slot, can line up out wide and in the backfield. So there's a ton of versatility. And this is what I said when the Raiders drafted Brock Bowers when I was on with you, Scott. As you said, it's on Luke Getzey to put all this together and make good gumbo and make sure it all works out because you have all these versatile offensive playmakers. Now you have to make it work.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right. So that's Brock Bowers. We know about Brock Bowers. Now, I think that the favorite grade for this guy is an A plus because I think
Oh, yeah.
not only is the next pick, of course, at number 44 in the second round, they took Jackson Powers Johnson, who was a center at Oregon, actually won the national award for that, and the name escapes me right now. But amazing play. Yes, thank you. And so he goes out and Tom Telesco, they go get a guy that not only is perfect for the Raiders from an attitude perspective. He talked about his grandparents, great grandparents having season tickets at the Coliseum. His first game was a Raider 49er game. So like the whole ethos just is perfect around Jackson Powers Johnson. The word I used in my story about him was mauler. That's the one you hear most. He is a tough dude. He's going to play guard for the Raiders, and his ability, his mean streak, and I mean, this is a guy you just plug into that line, and I think he's there for as long as he's healthy for a long time. This pick particularly, Mo, I think was great. I think the only thing that surprised me about it was that the Raiders, you thought tackle. Now you said they needed both, right? They needed, first of all, you needed depth. Second of all, you just needed to fix that right side. And so I was expecting tackle. Then they picked Jackson Powers Johnson. I was like, wow, this is a great pick. Surprised only because he's a guard, but now you have a guy to plug in there, and whatever happens at right tackle, which I still think they're thinking Thayer Munford because of how they drafted. This guy is, I think, to me, because Brock Bowers was amazing kid too. So the first 2 picks here, the Raiders just absolutely nail.
Right. I give the first 2 picks an A without a doubt. No hesitation there. With Jackson Powers Johnson, I know I'm going to struggle with his name because he has 2 last names right there, but JPJ. Few things with JPJ, that pick. But one thing I noted, and I forgot who said it, I think it was Ian Rappaport, said that when they drafted JPJ, the Raiders called Andre James and told him, "You're our center."
Mm-hmm.
So we know that JPJ is going to be competing to be the starting guard. I think he will start week 1 as a guard. I think Brock Bowers and JPJ, you can take those to the bank. Those 2 guys are going to be on the field. Maybe not label starters on the depth chart, but they're going to play a lot as rookies. With JPJ, I think he obviously enhances the interior of the offensive line. It's something they needed to do. What the pick also told me was they felt like the interior of the offensive line was a bigger need than tackle.
Yeah.
So they disagreed. So Tom Telesco disagreed with me on that one. He's a lot higher on Thayer Munford than I thought he would be. And when they picked JPJ in round 2, I said, okay, there are some decent tackles on the board. They went with JPJ. They went with the interior of the offensive line. So I said it the first night when they drafted Brock Bowers for out of BPA that seems like they like Thayer Mumford Jr. And if I had to put money on it, if I was a betting man responsibly, of course, I would say Thayer Mumford Jr. starts at right tackle and JPJ gets that right guard position. So that would be an interesting combination on the right side of the offensive line.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm not going to sit here and talk a lot about Jackson Powers Johnson because I mean, he's just a monster. He's the exact kind of guy. The fact that they were able to get him at 44 is great, and that speaks to the testament of how deep of a class it was, especially those tackles going early. So I think that in itself is huge. The fact that the Raiders got to 44 and they saw him there and say, "Oh my gosh, the luck has shone upon us here in Raider Nation." So this guy is going to be there. I think he's the type of guy, and it's hard to say this early, but I'm telling you, this is an all-pro type guard. I mean, this is the kind of guy you're going to see there, and he's going to be one of those anchors on that offensive line and strengthen it extensively.
Scott, I thought he was going to go in the first round to the Cowboys.
Me too.
I had him going to the Cowboys. Needed someone on the interior because they lost their starting center Tyler Biadasz to the Washington Commanders. I thought the Cowboys were going to get him on the back end of the first round. So as you said, so to get him kind of mid-second round, another value pick. So their first 2 Raider picks, great value. Of course, one technically wasn't a need. If you look at him as a tight end, Jackson Powers Johnson was a need, and you get him at great value. So again, an A pick there.
Yes. We go to round 3. Number 77 is DJ Glaze. Delmar Glaze is his full name, but apparently he goes by DJ. We'll see when he gets to camp exactly what he's asking for. Offensive tackle from Maryland. This is a guy who's got a lot of potential, but I felt like this was the first pick I felt like the Raiders kind of reached. And we think they reached, but at the end of the day, when a team evaluates players, Mo, they have their board and they see guys at not only the tape, but they see them at the Senior Bowl. And there's something around this guy that they really thought they would like. And I think primarily, if you look at what his strength is and could get better, is in the run game. This is a right tackle, I think, who could be a steamroller in the run game eventually. Now, you need pass protection too, but he's got massive arms. And so I think they look at him, even though there's a little bit of rawness there, I think he's the kind of guy where they're thinking, like you said, hey, Thayer Mumford, we're going to keep him. We expect him to start. We're going to bring DJ Glaze in and bring him along and develop him. Now, that's the long-term view again. Yes, you have a need at right tackle. At least we thought they did. But at the same time, here's a guy who might see some time if somebody gets hurt or in a situation, they might move people around and he might get some snaps. I would expect him to. But I think this is a guy that they don't want to hurry along, but they think so highly of. They took him in the 3rd round because they think he's got the potential to be that eventual starting right tackle.
So a few things about Glaze. The one thing is play tackle on the collegiate level at Maryland. So he projects as a swing tackle. So either Thayer Mumford is going to be your swing tackle with Glaze starting at right tackle, or Thayer Mumford is going to be the right tackle with Glaze being your swing tackle, in my opinion. Now, they did say that he may have some position versatility because he does struggle with outside rushers who have some speed. Yep. He gets beat with inside moves, so that's why you would possibly move him into guard if he struggles with that on the pro level. But this is going to be a guy that could possibly play 3-4 positions on the offensive line. I call those the utility offensive linemen, where you just plug them in wherever you have a hole. There are injuries. If a guy is not playing so well, you plug that guy in. He's usually the first offensive lineman off the sideline onto the field. So that could be Cody Whitehair at guard, but it could be Glaze at 3-4 position. So I expect again to be Thayer Mumford at right tackle with Glaze as a swing tackle, or Glaze as the right tackle with Thayer Mumford as a swing tackle, one of the two. But Glaze is an interesting prospect. I wouldn't have taken him there, but as you said, the Raiders saw something in him that we're going to get him at 77.
Right. Yeah. And again, that's where you see, because everybody's got their big boards, and we got guys, who follow the draft for a living, like every moment of every day, all year round. And so I respect their opinions, and I'm sure these teams do to a certain degree. But again, you have a guy you like, and you feel the values there, and you're going to pick them. And I think that's the situation with Glaze, and maybe, just maybe, he becomes the next great right tackle for the Raiders. Who knows? We'll see. But definitely surprise us there. But not a pick I expected. We go to round 4 at pick 112, and this was another one that I felt was a reach, Mo, and I'll tell you why in a second. DeCamerion Richardson out of Mississippi State. So the Raiders take their first cornerback, true to Tom Telesco form in the draft, as you noted, and they pick their cornerback, their first cornerback, and I like him. He's fast, 4.34, 40, I believe, and 6'2", obviously good size. He's got some quickness to him, and he's a long guy, but at the same time, didn't produce an interception in college. I think he's very, very raw, and so I was expecting the Raiders to find a guy who would get wherever they drafted him, that would be in competition for that outside starting corner job opposite Jack Jones. Richardson, I don't think he's going to. Maybe I'm wrong. Hey, I'd be happy to be wrong. I don't think he's going to compete for the starting role out there because I think he's got too much to work on. So this one, I don't even give this guy a grade. I just give it kind of an incomplete because I'm not going to say it's a bad pick per se, but I just think that there were players available at this time, TJ Tampa, some other guys who I felt could come in. Maybe they didn't win the job, but they could compete for the job. I just don't see that with Richardson.
Yeah, my guy Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon was available, and I was screaming for him. Goes to Minnesota. But if we're being honest, Scott, the Cameron Richardson probably is going to have to wait 2 years before he sees the field in a significant role. I don't want to doubt the young man coming out of Mississippi State, but if you're familiar with his game, you know that he has the physical tools. He's about 6'2", ran a 4.34 at the combine, so he has the speed and the size that you want opposite Jack Jones. But when it comes to mirroring wide receivers or staying with wide receivers in frame, shadowing them, not his thing. And that's why the zone system is going to be good for him, because then he can use more of his physical tools. But he's got he's going to need a lot of refinement. And I'm not too worried about the interception count because he does have a little bit of ball production with the pass breakups. But as you said, they're gonna have to work on it. They're gonna have to coach him up before he actually sees the field. So at this point, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a surprise play in this draft class that I think could get a lot more playing time than Richardson. Not saying it's a bad pick, but it's kind of a wait and see selection for me.
Yes, that's why I gave it an incomplete. I know some people are giving it a lower rating if people are grading it. Some people are giving them a B+ or an A-, which I think is ridiculous because I just don't think that's true. But I do think that it has to be incomplete because, to your point, they clearly like him enough that they felt they were going to get him at the 4th round, where most people projected him 5th, even 6th round. So whatever reason they felt they needed to go get him there, they did so. So that one's still a little bit of a head scratcher for me. We move on to round 5. Of course, we talked about him earlier at pick number 148, Tommy Eichenberg. This to me is a perfect pick. You look at him, what he's doing, a schematic fit here as well. He's a guy, like I said, not only is his motor nonstop like a Max Crosby, but he's a great tackler, Mo. He does not miss tackles, right? And I think that's been something we've seen over the last 5 years with the Raiders been trouble. Got much better last year with Spillane and those guys back there in the linebacking core. But to me, they ran at Ohio State that 4.25, I think, on defense, and that's what the Raiders do too. So you look at that and you're like, no brainer, not only because of the player, but because of the fit in Patrick Graham's system. You could not ask for a better guy to put in that role.
Hard-nosed player. Ohio State's known for those hard-nosed lunch pail linebackers. My guy Gary Davenport, who's my colleague at Bleacher Report, says you're getting a pretty good player in Tommy Eichenberg. I know a lot of people are going to knock him for lack of athleticism, lack of coverage production, but with it, as I said at the beginning of the show, with Antonio Pierce coaching that linebacker crew, and we've given him praise for coaching up that position, Tommy Eichenberg has a higher ceiling than he would have had with other teams. So I expect Tommy Eichenberg to have a decent role. While the Raiders run with 2 linebackers, most teams do, and most of their defensive alignments, I think if somebody goes down, eventually, if they don't resign Robert Spillane, don't be surprised if Tommy Eichenberg, a 5th rounder, is starting for the Raiders in the near future.
Yeah, I think you'll see him a lot in 2024. Like you said, Spillane's there. He's the incumbent. but I think you'll see him there, and I think you'll see him on special teams, and I think he'll
Of
be an
course.
animal on special
Yeah.
teams. I mean, he's gonna be one of those guys you're gonna watch because he's gonna do some great things. But I just love the pick. I love the fit. He fits in with the Antonio Pierce mentality and that Raider ethos, as I mentioned earlier. So I think it's good. And then we get to round 6, Mo. We knew the Raiders had to, I think, draft at some point. Didn't have to be early. I wanted them to maybe in the 4th or 5th take a running back, a couple of the guys that I like. A lot of people wanted Blake Corum. Of course, I'm a Notre Dame guy. I liked Audric Estime, which goes one pick before them to the Denver Broncos. So we'll see plenty of them. But Dylan Loeb from the University of New Hampshire, this is a guy that I love because I think he comes out of a small school, yes, but he is the kind of guy that I think fits in nicely as a third down back because he has good pass catching ability coming out of that. I know people aren't very familiar with him, but he tracks the ball like a wide receiver. And so when they drafted him, I went and watched the tape because I had no idea who he was. Looked at it and I'm like, okay, this guy leaks out, and on third down, especially, we don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback yet, if it's Minshew or if it's AOC. If it's O'Connell and his inability to move around a ton, this is a perfect guy in that system because he can throw the ball out to the receiver, and Loeb has a great pair of hands and can catch the ball coming out of the backfield.
So from my view, a lot of Raider fans are excited about Laube, and I think Laube's going to have an immediate role in that offense. I'm not obviously not a starter because you got Zamir White and Alexander Madison, but you can probably immediately insert him in on third down. So pass protection, pass catching out of the backfield. I believe he had over 100 catches, over 1,100 receiving yards over the last 2 years. As you said, not a lot of people's radar because he's coming out of New Hampshire, way on the northeast coast in the corner. So not a lot of people are paying attention to him. But I think even in this late round, as a late round pick, he's going to have an immediate impact because if the Raiders do have problems at right tackle, where Theo Mumford or Glaze are struggling, you're going to need a running back to stay in and block. Laube's going to be that guy. You need a pass catcher, an outlet for Aiden O'Connell to get the ball out quick, or Gardner Minshew to get the ball out quick. Laube's going to be your guy. You need he runs a 4.54, so not a speed guy. I prefer a speedy running back because I think the Raiders needed an explosive running back in that backfield to complement Zeus and Alexander Madison. But you are getting the technical part of the position where you're going to need the blocking, you're going to need the pass catching out of him.
Yeah, especially a little chip block, and then he's able to get the pass if it's a quick pass from the quarterback there too. But you're right. He's not that breakaway speed guy, which you'd like in that position because they get the ball into open space usually. And they're able to create something there. So we'll see how it all works out. All right, we go to round 7. Here's a guy I really love, Mo. This is a guy I was really excited to see them get in round 7, and that was Trey Taylor, the safety out of Air Force. He can play both the free and strong safety. I don't think you're going to find a smarter kid. And he is his cousin was Ed Reed, by the way, of Hall of Famer. But he's got good ball instincts. He's very disruptive out there. Now, the one downside with him is speed. It's not a gift. Can he get better at it? I hope so in the NFL. But I think his speed is the biggest question here with him. But again, he won an award for being the best defensive back in college football, or the Thorpe. Sorry, it was the Jim Thorpe Award. Excuse me. And he's been a guy that I've seen a lot, obviously, because he plays in the Mountain West, my alma mater, UNLV. I saw them play a couple times. But he's a guy here that I think, again, another developmental guy. But I think with a 7th round pick to get a guy that's got that football IQ in that room is a good thing for them, even if he does lack the speed that you would normally want in a safety.
So he's probably, if he were to see the field, probably be the replacement for Marcus Epps down the line, or eventually. That's what you're thinking about. Now, I thought this is an interesting pick simply because the Raiders have Trayvon Merrick. They have Marcus Epps, who I just mentioned. They drafted Chris Smith II last year, but Tom Telesco didn't draft Chris Smith II. So I'm wondering if Trey Taylor is going to jump Chris Smith for possibly that third safety position. And then they re-signed Isaiah Polamau, who's a kind of a hybrid linebacker safety. So they have an interesting mix of depth at the safety position. And I'm wondering who's going to really emerge as that third player behind Epps and Merritt.
Yeah, and I think that's why you look at Trey Taylor, as much as I like him, and I think it was a great pick, especially that late in the draft, is that, you bring him in and you have a great competitive camp, right, with all the guys you just mentioned. And so if he makes it, great. If he doesn't make it, it's 7th round pick. or you practice squat him and you develop him, because I think he can be developed, and we'll see how he does against that speed. I think the preseason will be great for him, and before the cuts to see what he's able to do there. But I really like Trey Taylor. You talk about just a smart, I think heady young man who could just be very smart back there and do something for this team that others can't. So we'll see how that goes. So Trey Taylor around 7. The last pick, of course, for the Raiders at 229 was MJ Devonshire out of Pittsburgh, another cornerback, read and react kind of guy. Like what he has. He has great kind of burst. He does tend to make some mistakes in coverage, but I wonder what your thoughts are. I was not as familiar, not a guy I spent a lot of time learning about, Mo, but with MJ Devonshire, the Raiders get another cornerback, and from what I've read, clearly people think highly of him as a developmental cornerback.
I'm not gonna say I watched 6 to 8 hours nonstop of Marlon Devonshire, but when I got familiar with him after the Raiders picked him as their Mr. Irrelevant, their last pick in their draft class, I really like him. I actually think Devonshire is going to see the field before Richardson, in my opinion, because I think Devonshire is a more polished cornerback at this stage in his career coming into the NFL. He has the ball production, 18 pass breakups, 7 interceptions over the last 2 years. While he doesn't have the long speed, he has enough speed to stay with wide receivers on the outside. But again, I believe the Raiders are going to play a lot of zone, so it's going to help him. But I think he actually could see the field earlier than Camryn Richardson because, in my opinion, better in coverage, has the ball production. And usually, if you show that you can get the football at training camp, they're going to put you on the field. They're going to find a way to get you out there on defense if you can force turnovers, and Devonshire can do that.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so there you go. The Raiders draft class, and as you said, Mo, you gave it a B+. I'm in the same range, and I think that there are some question marks there. There were definitely some reaches by our measure. The Raiders feel differently, and it really plays out when you see these guys get on the field. I mean, it doesn't matter. You could say, oh, it was a great pick in the first round. They did this, they did that, and then that player doesn't really have impact. So we're all just guessing still until they get into camp. But I think overall, like I said at the beginning of the segment, this was a draft that was clearly executed with a plan. They stayed to their plan. There was no craziness. Yeah, okay, every team's got 1 or 2 reaches, I think. But you look at what Tom Telesco did with Antonio Pierce in kind of trying to find the right player in the right position, and I think they did that well.
So I think that I don't think there were any wild reaches. Like even with Glaze, I would say I thought he was going to go in the 4th round, so it was 1 round earlier. Sometimes if you think a player is going to go a little earlier than you think, you may grab him around early. So I understand that. Even with Richardson, I thought he would have gone in the 5th round, goes in the 4th to the Raiders, only 1 round to me. So the good thing is no wild reaches early, especially with some of the past draft classes where you're drafting a player in the 2nd round and he probably would have been available in the 4th or 5th round. Or you're drafting a player in the top 15 and he would have been available, beginning of the 2nd round. So there was none of that, thankfully. Right. And after the Raiders went BPA in the 1st round with Brock Bowers, every pick after that, to me, in my opinion, addressed a need or added some depth at a position that may have been a little thin within a year. So all the other picks made sense from a roster need perspective. The only pick that stands out to a lot of fans is the Brock Bowers pick. And as I said, if you look at him as strictly a tight end, then you would say not a need. That's a luxury pick. But if you look at him as an offensive playmaker that you can use as a creative mismatch option, then you're thinking, oh, wow, he can open up the offense. So that's why I gave this class a B+.
Right, and that's why I was not in any way critical or surprised that they didn't get a wide receiver later in the draft, because I think with Brock Bowers, you have that guy, right? It's not the speed guy we thought they needed to maybe find, and maybe they will. But to me, that you kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone there. You get a guy who's a tight end and can play that position, but you also get a guy who can pop out and be a wide receiver for you, a la Travis Kelce. I'm not comparing him to Travis Kelce. You can't do that with a kid coming out of college. But the same way the Chiefs use Travis Kelce is what I would expect Luke Getsy to do with the Raiders.
Scott, I don't know if you remember, I had the post on Twitter, and I said there are 2 under-the-radar moves that I expected out of Tom Telesco. 1, for him to draft a wide receiver earlier than a lot of people expected, and 2, to draft a linebacker between rounds 4 and 6. Now, I nailed the linebacker prediction, dead on.
Yeah.
Tommy Eichenberg, 5th round. Now, they didn't draft a wide receiver per se, but they drafted a pass catcher earlier than a lot of people expected, and that's what Brock Bowers is going to be, to your point.
Yeah, first round. That was definitely earlier than expected. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to take our final break. When Mo and I come back, we'll talk a little bit about the undrafted free agents the Raiders signed. Of course, those guys are all very long shots. Yes, there's examples of UDFAs making it and doing well in the NFL, but they happen very rarely. So we'll talk about that, including a quarterback they signed. And then we'll talk about the quarterback situation because I think, coming out of the draft, the one thing everybody's praising the Raider class for the most part, but they're saying, yeah, but they didn't address the quarterback position. So we'll get into that a little bit to close out the show here coming up on segment 3. You're with Mo and Scott. This is Silver and Black Today. We're coming right back. Welcome back. It's the home stretch here on Silver and Black Today, the Tuesday edition, as we run through the Raiders draft class. A very good draft class, and I think a good sign for the future of the Raiders as Tom Telesco and Antonio Pierce in their first draft together really go about it in a professional manner. Speaking of professional, my partner, Moe Moton, with me. I'm Scott Gulbransen. And we're going to get into now a little bit, just quickly, undrafted free agents, Mo. After the draft is over, the guys that didn't go in the draft, teams go out. The Raiders signed 17 guys. A lot of people were like, I've never seen the Raiders sign that many guys. Tom Telesco last year with the Chargers, 17 guys, right? How many of them made the team in one way, either active roster or the practice squad? 2, okay? So just so you know, these guys are all long shots, even though you get people saying, well, don't sleep on that guy, don't sleep on this guy. We'll see how it all goes down. But in that undrafted free agent class, if you want to call it that, they did sign a quarterback, Carter Bradley from South Alabama, who you might know his father a little bit. Gus Bradley, former defensive coordinator for the Raiders, and now with the Colts. So they go out, they get their quarterback to go along with Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, and Anthony Brown Jr. So now there's 4 guys that'll be in camp. And really the only guy to me out of this undrafted free agent, and you never know, some of these guys come out of nowhere and good for them and God bless them. But not only Bradley's of mention just because of the lineage and also because he's a quarterback, but one of the guys that they did sign that I like that seemed to be high on people's list last year and then kind of fell back down was Andrew Coker. He's an offensive tackle too. So here's a guy that's an undrafted free agent. And I think that in those positions, you sometimes see guys break out a little more. I'm not expecting Andrew Coker to even make the active roster, but I think he's a guy they look at and say, man, he's got the size, the tools, everything. He did well 2 years ago, TCU in the national championship game against Georgia, and fell off last year for whatever reason. But I think that's the kind of guy, when you look at undrafted free agents, Mo, you might look at a guy for some reason who was highly touted and then fell a lot and say, well, he's got all the skills. Let's sign him as a free agent. We can develop him, keep him on the practice squad, and you never know what you get out of it. You might get a swing tackle. You might get a starting tackle. You never know.
So a couple of things here. Before we just write off these UDFAs as lottery tickets, which they kind of are,
yeah.
Let's just remember that Tom Telesco signed Austin Eckler as an undrafted free agent.
Yes.
Let's also remember that he signed Michael Davis, the cornerback who started several years, as an undrafted free agent. So he's hit on some undrafted free agents. So don't be surprised if someone from this crop comes, makes the roster and makes a contribution. What I did notice about this UDFA class for the Raiders, a lot of wide receivers on there. Yes. So while he didn't draft one, they added a few wide receivers there that could possibly fill out the back end of that depth chart. So I will have a piece on undrafted free agents. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are a couple that I have my eye on.
Yes, and I think that's, if you get a couple of those guys, if you hit on a couple of those guys, that's huge. Like you said, I mean, you mentioned 2 of the big ones for Telesco before when he was in Los Angeles, and that's hard to argue against that. So he's had a pretty good track record when you consider how big of how big of a long shot those guys are usually. And the Raiders have had some luck with it too in previous years with guys at least becoming role players, which is fine. I mean, when you're talking about undrafted free agents, that's what you would expect. All right, Mo, I want to kind of close the show talking about this because I think that one of the things that everybody who talks about this Raiders draft class says, hey, they addressed a lot of the needs that they had going in. So guess what? Mission accomplished. You went in, you needed offensive line help, you got it. You needed help on the defense, linebacker, cornerback, you got it, okay? And so you check the boxes there, and you did so, I think, with pretty good players. But then you look at the quarterback, and again, we talked to Baldy, we talked to Jason Fitz going back, and you say to yourself, what's the Raiders' plan at quarterback? What do they really think? They lack that quarterback. You look at the division now, and I mentioned this, whether you think Bo Nix, and I didn't think so either, is a first-round draft pick or not, he was drafted number 12 overall, okay? Even though most of us had him in the second round. every team in the AFC West now has a quarterback. Denver has 2 that were drafted in the first round. The Raiders have 2 fourth rounds, a 6th round, right? And now an undrafted free agent at quarterback. Now, where you're drafted does not indicate always if you're going to be successful, but clearly the Raiders, I think now you understand, as I said at the top of the show, why they signed Gardner Minshew. Because being at 13, they knew it was going to be difficult for them with what they needed to trade up. So I don't get mad at them. I know some fans are mad and they're upset because they think the Raiders have to get a franchise quarterback, and they do, but you can't control the situation. Tom Telesco walked into a team that had the number 13 pick overall. Yes, it was a deep quarterback draft. That's why they all went early. So when you look at this, I really tried being objective, Mo, to look at it and say the Raiders failed at getting a quarterback. But I couldn't get to that. I could only get to, because of the way the situation dictated, they had to have a plan B and C, and that's what they did because they couldn't find a dance partner at the top of the draft. So you had to defer it, kick the can down the road until next year perhaps, whether it's a free agent or a draft pick. Because what were they going to do, Mo? I don't understand what people would have expected them to do. So I give them not a pass. I understand what they did. I still think it's a massive need that they have, but they just couldn't address it this year.
This is why you address some of your needs in free agency, or try to address as many needs as you can in free agency, because you don't know how the draft is going to pan out. A lot of people expected Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr., including myself, to be drafted in the back end of the first round. So the Raiders, I guess, were expecting one of those 2 guys to be available at 13. Neither of them were on the board. So you have to prepare for situations like that. And they signed Gardner Minshew to a 2-year, $25 million deal, $15 million guaranteed for a reason. It's to cover yourself just in case something like that happens where quarterback that you like just isn't available while you're on the clock in certain spots. Now, I think a lot of fans would have been okay, or not okay, but expected them to draft a quarterback in the middle rounds. Spencer Rattler went in the 4th round to the Saints. Michael Pratt almost went undrafted. He went to the Green Bay Packers as a late 7th round pick. Joe Milton goes to the Patriots in the 6th round. Jordan Travis goes to the Jets in the 5th round. So I think a lot of fans expected the Raiders to address the position in those middle rounds, and they didn't do it. And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. What did we say on the last show before the actual draft? That we thought Joe Milton was going to go in the 5th, 6th round. A lot of Raider fans like Joe Milton. We said 5th, 6th round. He goes in the 6th round. Michael Pratt actually dropped a lot lower than I thought. I thought he was going to be 4th, 5th round. But the league is basically telling you what they think of these prospects. It wasn't just the Raiders passing on these players. A lot of teams that maybe had a quarterback interest. The Cowboys rumored to maybe go a quarterback earlier than expected, passed on these players multiple times. So I'm not sour about the Raiders passing on a quarterback if they didn't get the guy they wanted. I actually think that Gardner Minshew can get the Raiders to double-digit wins. It sounds delusional now in April, late April, early May. But I actually think Gardner Minshew is good enough with the offensive playmakers that the Raiders have. We talked about early in the show: Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers. Now you have a backfield with multiple backs. I think with that personnel unit, Gardner Minshew is good enough to get the Raiders to 10 wins. I know it sounds wild, but remember, the Raiders had a top scoring defense last year. So now Gardner Minshew is working with a top 10 scoring defense from last year. He's got all of these playmakers at his disposal if he wins a job over Aiden O'Connell. If it's Aiden O'Connell, same thing. He has a top 10 scoring defense and all of these playmakers. To me, it's on Luke Getsy to get the most out of this offensive personnel, and for Patrick Graham to continue building on what he started last year with this defense exceeding expectations and coming out of the woodwork and playing high-level football.
Right. And I think, too, that because they tried and knew that they couldn't get to the quarterback, so you go, if they could have gotten Jaden Daniels, let's say Washington played ball, and they go to number 2 and they take Jaden Daniels, then I think, okay, yeah, you still got to build your offensive line, but Jaden Daniels is a more mobile, I think, dynamic quarterback, right? So instead, Tom Telesco said, okay, we're going to have Gardner Minshew, who moves around. He's not a great mobile quarterback, but he's more mobile than Aiden O'Connell. And if Aiden O'Connell wins the job, boy, we better have a good line because he's going to need the time, i.e., to the Brock Bowers pick makes a lot of sense. So doing that, I think he understood. He understood what they had, and so he built the team accordingly. So for those of you who said build the offensive line first before you get a quarterback, you win. For those of us who said, hey, go get the quarterback, you can worry about the other stuff later, they didn't have the opportunity to do that. So, like you said, the way the draft fell, Mo, it dictated what they were going to do down the line. This is still an issue. Now, the way too early mock drafts, including on your employer site at Bleacher Report, some of the others have the Raiders taking Shedeur Sanders and picking 9th next year. Hey, look, anything can happen. I don't see the Raiders picking 9th next year, having a top 10 pick. That's just me, right? Because like you said, with Gardner Minshew or with AOC, I think you can get to double-digit wins with what they have and what they've done on the defense. So the Raider worrying about the quarterback now doesn't matter. You got to worry about 2024. The team you do have right now, they're still going to bring in some free agents here before camp, obviously, addressing some of the needs that they still have, including cornerback, running back. I still think they'll bring some guys in. So you look at that and you say, okay, well, then you don't worry about quarterback until next year again, see how the class where you draft, you might be able to draft up. You might be willing to pay more capital and move up in next year's draft. There's not as many guys, and you don't know who's going to be on the market via trade or free agency.
Dak Prescott, I think that's gonna be the big whisper next offseason because he's going into the last year of his contract. We don't know if the Cowboys are gonna extend him or not, but if he hits the free agent market, they're gonna be a lot. Say what you want about Dak Prescott, doesn't play as well in the playoffs, what have you. He gets his team to the playoffs, and that's the first step, right? So there's gonna be a lot of buzz around Dak Prescott next offseason if he doesn't sign a new deal with the Cowboys. What I will say about the Raiders in their draft position, we don't know what's going to happen in the season. Injuries happen, teams fall off, teams come up. I don't see the Raiders having a top 10 pick either, Scott, because of some of the things I just said. They have all of these playmakers on offense. They have a top 10 scoring defense from last year. I don't see them picking that high, but you can always, trade up. And I know it didn't work out this year. That doesn't mean it can't work out next year, depending on what the circumstances are. Let's remember the Vikings acquired an extra first-round pick. Now, they moved up one spot for J.J. McCarthy. But who's to say the Raiders won't acquire draft capital next offseason and try to move up for a quarterback, depending on what happens this upcoming season. But first, we have to, one step at a time, we got to get to the 2024 season and see how Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew do as starters.
Absolutely. And listen, I still believe that he's not a long-term starter in the NFL. He's a good quarterback. But let's say O'Connell proves me wrong and proves most people wrong and becomes a stud franchise quarterback. Then you don't even have to worry about it. Right. Minshew is a good player. I think we know what Gardner Minshew is, and I know what he isn't. So, but then again, you never know. So we'll see how it all works out. You'll have to worry about that problem next year. And like you said, Dak Prescott, absolutely. If the Raiders win double digits this year, if they win 10, 11 games, make the playoffs, or let's say they barely don't make the playoff, whatever it is, but they win double-digit games, you put Dak Prescott on a team that's that good defensively, has the offensive weapons around you, then you're talking about, as our good friend Q would say, cooking with grease, right? So it's one of those things where the situation will dictate that too. If the Raiders win 7 games, hopefully that's not the case, then different story. If they win 10, 11 games, then I could see that happening. So it'll be interesting to watch. I know people are, no, Dak Prescott, blah, 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 blah. We'll see how it all works out. But I think the quarterback situation, we've been talking about it now for 2 years, and then we're going to talk about it for a 3rd year until they sort of either get their guy or the guys that are there now perform at such a high level that it's no longer a question. Now,
I'm not saying the Raiders are going to win 10 games. I just think they're capable with the roster that they have built. Now, I will say this, for me, this is the silver lining, right?
Yeah.
I think the Raiders have a playoff caliber roster. The missing piece is just who's the franchise quarterback. Let's say the Raiders are stuck in mediocrity for another year, right? They're between, 8 and 10 wins. Let's say not 10. I would say 10, probably a playoff team. Let's say they're between 7 and 9 wins, right? So they're stuck in this middle ground, this mediocrity area of the NFL hierarchy. Right? A lot of people are going to groan at that. Fans are going to groan at that because they don't want to be in mediocrity. But let's say they are. And the one thing that's missing, again, is the dynamic or the high-level quarterback. Now you have a roster that's ready to win, and all they have to do is get the quarterback. So then next offseason, that should be your primary focus, right? We have this roster that can win 11, 12 games with the right quarterback. Whether we have to trade draft capital, whether we have to sign a veteran off the free agent market, depending on who's available, let's just get the quarterback and win out. Because as I said on other shows, That win now window can close very quickly. And when you have Devontae Adams at his age, I'm not saying he's old, but he's on the other side of 30, and you have top 10 defenses usually don't sustain themselves over a long extended period with free agency guys leaving, getting paid. You see with the Chiefs losing L'Jarius Sneed to the Titans, guys move around. So you don't really usually have a dominant defense for extended periods. Few teams do, but it's hard to keep those units together. So while you have this defense, while you have Devontae Adams still playing at a high level, while you have some of these young and upcoming players, get the quarterback next year. And I think it should have been a primary focus this year. Didn't happen for circumstances we talked about with quarterbacks going early off the board, and then the free agent market, Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta. But next year, if you see that you have a roster that's stuck in this 7, 8, 9 win range, get the court, do whatever it takes to get the quarterback before that win now window closes.
Yeah, and I think that's why I look at it. And I listen. Everybody can make fun of me if they want. I don't care. The Michael Penix draft pick. Now you might not agree with the player because of his age and his injury history, but they're like, well, they just signed Kirk Cousins. Yeah, but Kirk Cousins is 36, coming off an Achilles injury. You saw what happened, and I know. Listen, a lot of people criticize Kirk Cousins. What has he won? It's a good question. It's a good quarterback. Don't get me wrong, but we saw what happened with Russell Wilson in Denver, right? Didn't work out, and they just ate the money. So in Atlanta, if Kirk Cousins comes down there and he does great, awesome. You got another quarterback behind them. You can't be too deep at quarterback, as we learned last year with the most quarterback injuries in the history of the league. And the Falcons believe they're on the crux of being able to be a playoff team again. So they went out, they spent the money on the quarterback, but they hedged their bets in bringing in Moe's doppelganger, Michael Penix Jr. So I actually don't. It was a shock, yes, but I don't disagree with what they did. Yes, they had a need on defense and they had all this kind of stuff, but it's the most important position on the field. So maybe I'm in the minority on this, but I get why they did it.
Scott, just give me 2 minutes here because
okay.
I still can't forgive the Falcons for what they did in picking Michael Penix.
Why?
Okay, now I get what you're saying. And a lot of people are saying it's the Green Bay Packers playing with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. There are two problems with that comparison. Number one, the Packers didn't just pay Aaron Rodgers before they drafted Jordan Love. So remember, just last month, the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal with $100 million in guarantees. When the Packers drafted Jordan Love, it was already understood that Aaron Rodgers was on his way out. He just surprised them with another MVP season. And they weren't expecting that, but they were ready to move on. I know Packers fans. They were ready to move on from Aaron Rodgers. They weren't just bringing him in as the Falcons are with Kirk Cousins. The other thing is Jordan Love could afford to wait 3 years to start because he got to start at his age 25 season. He came into the league at 21 years old. Michael Penix is going to be 24 in May. So if he waits 3 years, he's going to be much closer to 30 than Jordan Love was after waiting for 3 seasons to play. So to me, the comparisons, and you didn't make this comparison, but the comparison to the Green Bay Packers with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love is not apples to apples. No. Again, Penix older than Love, and the Packers didn't just pay Aaron Rodgers or re-up on his contract before they drafted Love. And now you got the GM, Terry Fontenot, saying that if Michael Penix, if a quarterback has to sit for 4 or 5 years, so be it. If Michael Penix has to sit for 4 or 5 years, he's going to be damn near 30 before he hits the field.
Right. And there's no way in hell, Mo, that Kirk Cousins is playing at 40. There's no way.
Hey, quarterbacks are playing a lot longer now, Scott.
I know.
If he has good protection and he's playing, and remember, before he got hurt, he was playing at a Pro Bowl level.
Yeah.
And Kirk Cousins didn't miss any games due to injury before that. Before 2023, he was arguably the most reliable quarterback when it comes to playing on the field. Didn't miss games due to injury. So if he's healthy and he's still playing at a Pro Bowl level, Michael Penix is going to become an afterthought in Atlanta. I just don't get the pick at 8. You are in a winnable division in NFC South. Get a defensive player, because as I just said, that win now window can close very quickly. And if you're okay with sitting, your number 8 overall pick for 4 to 5 years, you are wasting a pick. Yes. You are wasting a pick.
But who's to say they don't flip him? Who's to say they don't trade him?
Trade him to the Raiders then. They should just let him fall to the Raiders for that. I mean, come on. I wanted to see, if you're asking me, maybe this is selfishly me saying this, but I don't want to see Michael Penix Jr. on the sideline. I love Michael Penix as a
Yeah.
prospect. I hate his landing spot in Atlanta. Hate it.
I exactly. But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I understand why they did it
I
because you
understand,
just
but
don't know. And 4 years ago, if we said to anybody, yeah, they're going to eat $100 million in contract, nobody'd be like, nobody will ever do that. But we saw it with Russell Wilson. We've seen it with other players too. And I think that with the quarterback position, you said this many times on the show, which is like, hey, you go get one. If he doesn't work out, go get another one. Go get another one. Now, I expected them to go defensive end in that first round, or at least, or defensive tackle, because that's where they need help. Because they won 7 games last year, and a lot of it was because of defense, and they didn't do it. So we'll see. But yeah, fascinating picks, I think. And that one, to your point, and I made this on draft day when they say 4 to 5 years, no way. 1 year, okay. So if Kirk Cousins is signed to a 4-year deal, is it 4 or 5? I can't remember.
4.
4-year
deal.
So you can't sit there for 4 years. So you're either going to crap the bed on Kirk Cousins and then you got your quarterback at Michael Penix, or you got to trade him. Like if I'm Michael Penix, I don't want to sit there for 4 or 5 years. Like
exactly. If I'm Michael Penix, the worst thing I can hear on now, I'm happy to be drafted 8th overall.
Yeah.
But if I'm hearing my GM saying, yeah, it may not play for 4 or 5 years, and that's fine, I'm like, dude, you're wasting my prime.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to sit here and watch Kirk Cousins play.
That's why, and I don't ever wish anybody and don't want anybody to get hurt. But if Kirk Cousins, for some reason, isn't effective or can't play this next year, and Michael Penix goes in and lights it up, they got a big problem. Because now you're on the hook for all this money, and this kid comes in and does well. Otherwise, I don't see Michael Penix there in 2 years if Kirk Cousins goes out and balls out. Because to your point, you can't wait till the guy's 30 years old to start him. It's just not going to work. Right? Like you said, if he's 21, great.
Right.
He's 24, 25, that's fine. What is the age he's at now?
And Scott, I've always said I don't have a problem with older quarterbacks coming into the league.
No.
And I want to preface that by saying if they're going to start within the next 1 or 2 years, if a quarterback comes into the league at 24 years old, he doesn't start till he's 25, 26, fine. If he has a 10-year career, he plays till he's 36 years old. If you're talking about sitting Penix, who's going to be 24 in May for 4 to 5 years and not playing him till he's damn near 30 years old, you are wasting a top 8 pick. Give that pick to someone, give that quarterback to somewhere else where he can play. Yes. Come on, Falcons.
Yeah,
come on, Falcons.
It's craziness. The NFL, there's always somebody who does something like that.
Stupid.
All right.
So I don't use that word a lot.
No, you do not. I do. Potty mouth over here. I'm kidding. Anyway, but that's going to wrap up the show. Mo, let everybody know what you got going with Bleacher Report. And, of course, your Sports Not piece. You mentioned something earlier about that, but let everybody know what you're up to this week.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by giving my takeaways of the Tom Telesco draft class. Not necessarily my opinion of the picks, because you heard that today. You've heard it on my Bleacher Report Live. I'm not going to break down the draft picks, but just a holistic look, a big picture, a macro look at what I could take away from this draft class from the view of Tom Telesco. So basically, what do I see that Tom Telesco sees in his roster based on the draft class? I don't have any Bleacher Report Lives planned or scheduled, but once the schedule releases, I'm going to give my early predictions for the Raiders win-loss record, and I'll go through each game one by one, which games the Raiders win and which games the Raiders lose.
There you go. Absolutely. I'll have a bunch of stuff, too, on the Raiders. Probably some features on some of these players and how they fit into the schemes for the Raiders. So look for that, too, on sportsnot.com. We will, of course, be back Thursday, and we'll get into some other issues around the Raiders and the draft and players and what holes they still need to fill. Where are they thin? Where are they rich? We'll talk about that, too. Might even have a guest on for you. And then, of course, we'll get to the Raider Nation mailbag. So if you haven't already done so, we want to know what you think of the draft. How are you guys thinking? Let us know. Leave us a message for the next show, 702-900-7869. That's 702-900-7869. We want to know how you felt about the draft. So lay it on us. Name where you're calling from and try to do your call. Under 2 minutes is great. But it is the draft. We want to hear your feelings. Want to know what's going on. So we'll do that. But we will be back here. Want to thank our producer, Mike Robier, and, of course, my partner, Moe Moton, who's maybe we can catch up on a little sleep this week. Right, Mo?
Not exactly. Maybe by Friday.
That's what I'm saying.
Got a lot to do.
I work to the weekend, so like I'm taking Friday off this week. I sports on. I'm like, hey, I'm working through the weekend, so I'm just going to take the next 2 Fridays off. But undoubtedly, something crazy will happen on those Fridays, and we'll have to work. But anyway,
Of course.
but that's what we're going to do. But we're going to be back here with you Thursday. So thanks for being with us. For Mo, I'm Scott Gulbransen. This has been Silver and Black today. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon, Raider Nation.